Hello, this is Pierluigi Sereno. I'm the co-author with Erika Stoller of Edra Stoller, A Photographic History of Modern American Architecture, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. And that world today extends to the Netherlands, with architects Tycho Saariste and Jan Richard Kikkert, authors of the new book Lautner A-Z. There's even an introduction by our great pal Alan Hess. He's the Samuel L. Jackson of architecture documentaries.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's been in more movies than anyone else in architecture. Whether you're new to modernism or a longtime fan clinging to your Eames chair, you'll want to march right down to the bookstore and pick up this incredibly detailed book about the celebrated modernist architect John Lautner. Beyond that is a fascinating adventure of multiple overseas trips from Holland to America, visiting nearly every single house and structure that Lautner designed. And now, here's your host and one of their biggest fans, George Smart.
Hi, folks. When I think of dedication and perseverance and being clearly obsessed with something in the most positive way possible, I think of these two guys. We here at U.S. Modernist,
Like our remarkably resourceful Cindy Stratton, not a real name,
like to think we are the Olympic champions of putting OCD to good use. But our guests today are the Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, the Ferranti and Teicher, the Martin and Lewis, the Siegfried and Roy, minus the Tigers.
Good.
The Batman and Robin of the modernist research game. I'm not sure who's Batman and who's Robin, but no Lautner house can escape these caped crusaders. What started out as a fairly typical architecture fanboy project,
which you would know nothing about,
no,
of
nothing,
course,
has turned into years and years and years and years of painstaking research, days and weeks of poring over Google Earth and satellite images, travel all over the United States and even into Mexico, visiting houses and meeting owners, and of course putting all this down in an informative and entertaining and unprecedented book, Lautner A-Z. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In episode 2 of our continuing space story, there is unrest in the Galactic Home Builders Senate. Several thousand planets have declared it ungalactic to build modernist, insisting on giant symmetrical structures with Palladian windows, entries like missile silos, and vast arrays of ugly yet sustainably solar-powered gables. This McMansion movement makes it difficult for the remaining modernist knights to maintain design harmony in the galaxy. Senator Angela Roll, former slave girl, rescued by Queen Hadid in episode 1, remember, had a critical role in creating an army of building inspectors to root out poor construction and finally put the McMansions to rest. Stay tuned as the evil emperor hires Donald Trump XIV to develop Empire Woods, and the brave rebel Bjarke Ingels' planet builds a new battlecruiser that doubles as a ski slope and serves the best lattes in the galaxy. Centuries earlier in 2019, it was Princess Angela's ancestor, not surprisingly also named Angela Roll, that kept the passion burning for modernism. Angela Roll, a real estate agent with specialized design training, advises buyers and sellers of modernist houses on everything from appropriate renovation to ripping out Palladian windows. Angela Roll is your special real estate agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL or 919-995-0550.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
Architect John Lautner of Los Angeles was incredibly ahead of his time. He started his career with the best, Frank Lloyd Wright, and ended with a popular following that has only grown exponentially since his death in 1994. Over 50 years, Lautner blurred the boundaries between indoor and outdoor spaces, between nature and architecture. He carried out 144 of his designs, 103 of which are still standing, mostly around Los Angeles, and all are highly prized. 2 architects in the Netherlands set out to personally discover not just a few of his projects, but all of them. Jan Richard Kikkert is head of the architectural department of the Amsterdam Academy of Architecture. He is founder of Architectenbureau K2, with projects such as the Metropolitan Housing Maashaven in Rotterdam and the Duo Towers in The Hague. And not surprisingly, he is a member of the board of advisors of the John Lautner Foundation. Tycho Saariste is senior architect for, let's see if I get this right, Gortemaker Algra Veenstra in Rotterdam, with award-winning projects such as the St. Luc parking garage in Brussels, the Campus Bridge in Ghent, the Train Control Center in Utrecht, and design for his own house, which I tried to find on the internet, but I'll have to talk about that. Together with Jan Richard, their book has an attention to detail where you can see the dedication and commitment unmatched by any other book I've seen in architecture. Both these gentlemen were featured in the John Lautner documentary Infinite Space in 2008 in the early days of their adventure. Welcome, guys.
Hey.
Hi. Good to see you and good to be here.
Great introduction. Thank you.
Oh, well, we are so thrilled to have you. Jan Richard, when we had you on the show a few years ago, I think you were just getting the book draft together. So what's been happening since then?
Well, as an architect, it's always difficult, or you think you have difficulties in getting your designs built. But let me tell you, boy, making a book is another story. It took some time, but we're totally happy that it finally reached the market now. But it's been quite a process.
When was the book first released and where?
It was in November 8th. We had the introduction in Arnhem.
In 2018?
2018, yeah. So the end of 2018. That was the Dutch version. And the English version, well, we had some trouble with it. It was supposed to come out also the same date. But now it's there available since May 2019.
Is it on the usual places like Amazon and Barnes & Noble yet?
Amazon definitely, yes. Barnes & Noble, we didn't check it out yet, but it's probably there also.
But the distribution is not in our hands, so we don't really know. Probably it will be everywhere, but that's a very slow process. We found out. We didn't know that.
It's a tough business being an author, no matter how great the book is, but that's what we want to talk about next. Tycho, for our listeners who are new to John Lautner, tell us about his career and how he came to be so famous as an architect.
He started, of course, as an apprentice of Frank Lloyd Wright, where at first he was doing almost the same. He was continuing the things he learned at Frank Lloyd Wright, but he discovered that he found his own ways. He tried to go even further than Frank Lloyd Wright did. Frank Lloyd Wright was always he had this way of designing, and for John Lautner there was no way of designing. He was just exploring everything for a certain client, for a certain site, the new technologies. He would incorporate anything he could find just to make a better place for living. And there were literally no borders of where he would stop, where his thinking would stop. So he explored that all the way through his career, which spanned over 50 years, and especially when his latest works were just unsurpassed, where there were no boundaries between inside and outside, where the site would have been literally pulled into the house to have a connection with the living and the landscape and the view. So it's quite different than what other architects did in the same period of time, given the fact that most of his famous work was maybe in the 60s, where the international style was very popular, where everything was straight and straight lines and white, and he was just exploring different territories.
Was Lautner a student of Wright at Taliesin, or was he an employee of Wright's?
He was a student at Taliesin. That's where it started, and later he was also employed by Wright to work on certain projects. So he was sent to Los Angeles for Wright to supervise the construction of the Sturgis House. And then when he was there in Los Angeles, he later thought, well, I'd better start my own office. How'd that go? I think it went pretty smoothly. Say he was young. He wanted to have do his own things. Frank Lloyd Wright did help him at the beginning to start his career. There were some commissions that Frank Lloyd Wright turned down, but said, well, I have this young, talented architect, John Lautner, who could maybe he could work with you. So He was helped by Frank Lloyd Wright, and actually I think they always had a good understanding. I wasn't there, of course, but
you weren't there. It seems like you know so much about him.
Only 48 now. So.
Jan Richard, there's a bookshop in Amsterdam. I believe it's called Architecture and Nature. Is that right?
Yeah, Architectura et Natura, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where you picked up your first book on Lautner.
Yeah, I was actually working in an office around the corner, and they made me head of the library of the architecture office. And I said, well, I'd like to do this, but I want to be able to buy also books, not only maintain the library, but also sort of take care of new books. So you could find me in that bookstore every day, more or less. And then one day, the reprint of Lautner's own monograph entered the store. And I bought it because I thought, wow, this is really amazing kind of stuff, totally different than what we are used to or what we were used to in the Netherlands. So I kept that book as a treasure. And then, interesting enough, many people bought that book, also in the Netherlands, but it was almost like a secret society. People did not know from each other that they had the book and admired it. More or less everybody who owns the book is also a Lautner fan. It's almost impossible not to own the book and, not be a fan.
Would you say that the Netherlands is a hotbed of Lautner fans?
Well, it goes very much against our tradition, which is really almost, you could say, steered in a very Calvinistic way. We love to be the research the existence minimum, how small can it be, and can we make it even smaller, how minimal can it be. So Lautner almost goes directly opposite. I always compare it to with music, Lautner uses the entire keyboard of a piano instead of just a few tones. So I would say yes, he has fans, but it has always been a sort of secret fans, sort of secret society of fans. Not openly admitting that you actually admire real architecture.
So all on the down low, people know about Lautner.
Exactly.
Tycho, how did you discover John Lautner?
For me, I was in with an excursion with the university in 1994, and there, we were looking at the standard stuff, the case study houses, but also we were visiting some less known projects. By coincidence, actually, we visited Silvertop, which was great, but it was just right after the Northridge earthquake, so it was in a very bad condition. So the whole glass was broken, and there was a crack in the dome, and so they had a lot of damage. And we also visited the Wolf House, and the Wolf House was, for me, such a discovery. It was absolutely everything which I was looking for in architecture. Before, I had been visiting in Europe and India, I was visiting Le Corbusier's work very extensively, which I always loved, but it was always a bit cold in a way. And then when I visited the Wolf House, it was modern, but it was warm and cozy. It was, for me, really amazing.
And the Wolf House is in L.A.?
Yeah, the Wolf House in Los Angeles. So the Wolf House, it stuck with me forever, but I didn't know anything else about him. I didn't know other projects because the book was not out yet, which was actually years later when in an office where I worked, my former boss gave it to me as a present for Christmas. So I was really surprised that not only the Wolf House was great, but all the other houses in this book were also marvelous, and none of the two houses were the same. They were entirely different. So I really fell in love with this, and I thought, well, I have to see more of it.
How did the two of you meet each other?
Well, we have something interesting in common. It's actually one of our parents is from a country called Estonia, and Tycho's father was one of the greatest teachers in Delft University, and he once made a comparison with architecture and language. He says, in some languages you have a different word for the same thing. And then he made a few examples of what kind of languages. So papillon in French, and butterfly in English, and smetterling in German, and vlinder in Dutch. But he also said liplikas, which is actually the Estonian word for butterfly. Huh. In that time, nobody even had heard of that country because it was still part of the Soviet Union. So after the class, I went to him and said, "Oh, this is interesting. How do you know an Estonian word?" And he says, "Well, actually, I was born in Estonia." And then, interesting enough, my family knew his family before Tycho and I knew each other. So that was more or less the base. And then his father organized his most magnificent field trips. And then it was always tradition at the end of the trip, we would go to Tycho's father's house or their house to show slides to each other, slideshows in those days. And then Tycho would always be there to play music for us in the intermission because he was still a high school kid at the time.
So he was the entertainment.
So we know each other a long time.
That was more or less the entertainer. But I always enjoyed seeing all the slides with all the students. So I was always there and I played guitar in the intermediate. Yeah.
So Estonia must be a pretty small country if you guys both knew each other and then re-encountered each other.
It's more or less the people who fled to the Netherlands. They would meet up somehow. But Estonia has the size of the Netherlands, but only a tenth of the population, and half the tenth of the population lives in the capital. So it is actually a really pretty small country.
So Tycho, in 1994 was your first university trip to California.
Yeah.
When did the two of you make your first Lautner journey to the U.S. trying to find houses together?
That was actually in 2007. I think we always stayed in contact, and we had a chat or a beer from time to time, just talking about architecture, because we knew we were the only two which were really, really fanatic when you're visiting architecture. That nobody else would go this far, and otherwise other people would always say after the third or fourth house, well, let's have a drink or let's have lunch. And we were like, okay, if you can choose between having lunch or having lunch just very quickly on the way and see 2-3 more buildings, we would always do that. So we always had this click together. But then in 2006, young Richard called me and he said, well, you've already seen a little bit of Lautner. I'm planning on organizing an excursion with the academy where he was teaching in Arnhem. And I immediately said, you're going to look at Lautner works, I'm going to join you. Whatever it takes, I'll be there. I will be joining you. For him, he says, well, it's a trip to university and it's difficult. And I said, well, you heard me. I'm going to join you, whatever it takes. So we did. So we came to an agreement for what do I have to do to be able to join you. And he said, well, you can help me organize it and try to find addresses of the houses because they were not known at all. So we started to hunt for the addresses with Google Earth. Really, like every evening, we would sit behind a computer and scan Los Angeles, just looking at the floor plans and the north arrow, which we knew from the book, see if we recognized anything. And we would not go to sleep before we at least found one.
That's dedication right there. I tell you, that is very strong dedication.
And mind you, it was in a time when Google Earth was not that sharp. If you now, you can put the place marks in. If you now look at houses that we searched forever, and because the maps are being updated occasionally, now you cannot almost not imagine how hard it was to find a few of these locations.
I can imagine. I've done some of that myself. You have to look at the roof lines and where the trees are. And sometimes where the house numbers are, if you can get a shot from the street.
Yeah, things like that, yeah. We did that really for almost like half a year. I think we started in October 2006, started preparing, and the excursion was in May 2007. But we were amazed how much we, in the end, could find, because it was not only finding the addresses. After the addresses, it's also important. You have to see these houses from the inside. That means you have to get an appointment. So we had to find the names of the owners, email addresses, telephone numbers, whatever. So it's amazing how, from your room at home in the Netherlands, how much you can find over the internet. You could find how much people donated for the Republican Party or whatever.
It is amazing.
A lot of times we knew far too much before we even contacted them.
You know, it was also interesting, like you have the International Movie Database. And then if you look at the list of built works in Lautner's monograph, you could find specific names. And if you then would put those names in the list of the International Movie Database, you could see that some guy, with a specific name won an Oscar for something, occasionally obscure Oscars. And then 2 years later, there's a list of the project of the same name. So then we looked at the white pages for names, and sometimes there's only 3 people living in the United States with the same name. And then we just decided to phone them all 3, and then, it was bingo. And then, but it went on and on like that.
So, Dutch stalkers, eh?
Absolutely.
We got your number there.
Who went with you on this trip? Because I see, particularly in the photos, like in the Elrod house, there's more than just the two of you. Were these members of the secret society?
Not yet. No, we had students from Arnhem Academy and one coordinator, Michiel Spaan. But one of the students actually, he wrote a paper on Lautner. So he was also very fanatic. So there was definitely a fanatic in our group. But we had Annemiek, Arthur, Heike, Hugo, Lou, Michiel, Ralph and Rudy. Those were the students.
Yeah, 7 students, the coordinator and us 2, so 10 in total.
On your first trip, how many places did you visit in 2007?
Like 60 or something?
60, yeah.
60?
Wow.
Yeah, I think we had appointments at maybe
In how long a period of time?
In a week. I think we had 50 appointments, and then on the way we managed to get another 10 just on the fly. But just ringing doorbells from houses where we didn't have appointments or...
So it sounds like a lot of projects, but it's not like rushing through the project. But the thing that we did, we more or less eliminated all the in-between time. So no coffees, no dinners, no lunches.
No sleeping.
Because of the time difference, we get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock. Can we come around at 7? Yeah, sure, so there was no time lost. So it was, and then when we were at the project, we could take lots of time, to take it, really discover the project. And of course, the people in the US are always totally welcoming. So there was always a coffee or a wine or even a huge dinner party, or always extremely generous and welcoming. So just a combination of eliminating all the in-between time can make you really efficient. Actually, I found at a certain moment we had a little gap in our time schedule, and we were close to the house of Julius Schulman. So I phoned Schulman to say, look, is it okay if I come around with students? And he was, of course, you probably met Schulman, also very generous. Oh, you have to come by, and I have such a beautiful garden, and then we can spend some hours here. I said, hours? No, I actually, I have 1 hour max. And he said, 1 hour max? What are you doing? I said, we're just looking at Lautner, as many as possible. And then Schulman said, that's a very bad idea. Goodbye. Boom. And then he put down the phone.
Now, he was not particularly engaged by Lautner, was he? I mean, he was more a Neutra and...
He was. If you look at the monograph, there's a lot of photographs by Schulman, but Schulman was not the photographer for Lautner because Schulman used it as a still life, as a bouquet of flowers. So he would put lamps behind the furniture. He would go on his knees to take a photograph. So he's definitely not our favorite photographer for Lautner work. Not compared to, for instance, Leland Lee, who did this magnificent shots of the Elrod house. So, but there's quite some Schulman photographs in the monograph, although they're not typically Schulman. So the interesting thing with, for instance, Schulman photographing Neutra is that it's, in reality, the architecture is never as good as the photographs. But in John Lautner's case, it's the opposite. The real stuff is almost endlessly better than the Schulman photograph of the work.
I've noticed that too. Let's talk about some of the houses. So his more famous houses are the Elrod House and the Hope House in Palm Springs, and the Sheets Goldstein House and the Chemisphere House in L.A. Could you talk about some of those? And they're some of his most popular, most heralded accomplishments. What was it like to visit them?
Well, they're the most famous because of the size, because they look so extreme. But 2 of them, I think, the 4 you named are absolutely fantastic and great, and that's the Elrod House and the Sheets Goldstein House. The Hope House is very interesting alone by its sheer size, which is just for us just so extreme for Dutch standards, especially. It's almost not a house anymore. But at the moment we were there, it was not in very good condition. So and we haven't seen the new the renovated parts yet, so I don't go into that too much, I think. But the Elrod House, just to be in that space, just when you imagine that just Lautner had the vision to create this space with these rocks in between, inside, outside space, completely sheltered, being in the middle of the desert, it was absolutely amazing to see this for real. And even so much better than most of the pictures show, although the Leland Lee pictures are very good.
Now, the interesting thing with the Elrod is also that it doesn't contain any objects. It's like the perfect house, but the perfection lays in its location, in the materials. But if you look at the photographs, there's no objects in it. The only object you see is like an ashtray, for socializing. There, of course, there's furniture, you can sit down. So it's a total social space. That makes it very interesting. But of course, the Taschen house, or the Chemisphere house, which is owned by Benedict Taschen, famous publisher, because of its fame, it's also very, very interesting to see. And it took us quite some time to actually be able to get in that house, because Mr. Taschen is a very famous guy. A lot of people want to see his house. You get requests every day. So initially he said no to our question if we could visit the house. So we phoned him in Köln, in Germany, to his office there. And I said, it's not really difficult or possible. We wrote him in his house in LA. It was also not possible. But by the time we were there, because there are two other Lautner projects next door to the Chemisphere house, the students just rang the door. And then a boy answered the intercom. He says, did you talk to my father? And truthfully, they said, yes, we did talk to your father. Not mentioning, he said,
He said no.
No. So he opened the gate to us. So we climbed the mountain to go into the house. And literally almost the moment we tried to set foot in the house, then the boy realized the nasty truth. So he screamed us off the mountain again. So we thought that we will never see this house anymore. And then what happened is years later we got really friends with one of the other Lautner houses, the Eisler Guest House. And he suggested to organize a party where we could invite everybody who had something to do with Lautner. So he said, okay, if we invite Julius Schumann will come because he just published a book with Taschen. So if Schumann is coming, Taschen will come. And then maybe we have the opportunity to convince Taschen in person that we could see the house. But then there was also the great-grandson of Lautner was also on that occasion in Los Angeles. So there's actually a great photograph in our book where Taschen speaks to the great-grandson, and he offers the great-grandson, you're allowed, would you be interested to see my house also? And then the boy said, of course, yeah, sure, but can I bring a few friends? And then Taschen, yeah, okay, no problem. And we were these two friends that he brought then. So that in the end it all came okay.
Describe for people the Chemisphere house visually. What is it like when you see it from the road?
So you have this large concrete pole in a very steep hill, and on top of this concrete pole there's a house in the shape of a flying saucer. So that's more or less what it's known. Of course, the interesting thing is that Lautner didn't want to design a flying saucer house. No, he just was looking for an idea to how to build on such a steep site. Because everything would just roll off. So it was almost unbuildable, this site. So Lautner had this idea to just make this huge, giant concrete column. And so on top, there we could make a flat surface, so we can put a house on top with a bridge to get there. So it was actually very pragmatic thinking. But it's, of course, now famous as the most modern house in the world. It was in 1960 in the Encyclopedia Britannica. It was already called like that. So it's famous, but I don't think it's famous for the good reasons. But okay, I mean, who cares?
Well, the two houses we've talked about, the Elrod house in Palm Springs and the Chemisphere house in Los Angeles, are both celebrities because they've appeared in a number of movies. Is that right?
That's true.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that the work of Lautner is more famous than he himself as an architect, because you have the Charlie's Angels, the Sheets Goldstein, you have of course the Big Lebowski, who's also in Sheets Goldstein.
There's video clips.
You have the Garcia house, which is pulled down on a hillside. By Mel Gibson.
Lethal Weapon, right?
Lethal Weapon 2, yeah. There's actually some adult movies that are filmed in Sheets Goldstein also. So that's a lot of people know the architecture without knowing the name of the architect.
The Chemisphere was, I think, Body Double.
Body Double, yes.
Right?
Oh, okay.
I already knew that one long before I knew Lautner.
And then
in the 80s, yeah.
And then the Elrod house, of course, was perhaps one of the most famous. It was in a Bond film, Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah. It was filmed at the time that in between the two remodels in 1971, the original glass facade which came into the house was just blown out in a storm. So there was, at the time that Diamonds Are Forever was filmed, there was no facade at all. And later Lautner redesigned it and made these huge sliding doors.
You did your first visit in 2007.
Yes.
And then the movie, the documentary about Lautner, which I believe Sean Connery was in, didn't he do the introduction for that? That came out in 2008. So how did you guys get involved with the documentary?
Well, it's really funny because at a certain moment we did our visit, and then we came home, and then a few months later there was an email by a production company by a woman called Sarah Sagner. And she says, I'm the producer of a movie directed by Murray Grigger about John Lautner. And she said, well, we went, every house that we went to film, the people would say, oh, that's interesting. We just had a group of Dutch young students visiting the house. So with the first house, I thought, okay, whatever. But nearly every house that they filmed, the same story popped up. So they really got curious.
Who are these people?
Who are these people? Yeah. So she contacted us. And I think for reasons that it's also to show the current interest in Lautner's work or on current generations, they thought it would be interesting to put us also in the movie. So they came especially to the Netherlands to film a few of us and to have them in the movie. And we became friends. We also when we went to LA the next year, we got to see the raw version of the movie. So it was really, this is just great people. We stayed in their house, and Murray really was the one telling us, together with Alan Hess, you have to write a book. If you've seen so much, you have to write a book. It would be stupid not to do so. So we actually, those two guys stimulated us to put our memories down on paper.
And what I love about this book is, besides being a great architecture book about Lautner's work and his houses and these great photographs, this is really the story of you guys just being fans of Lautner and visiting these houses, the observations that you have. I remember there was one house you visited where there was this sort of very large bodyguard type guy who kept his eye on you the whole time.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? To make sure that you weren't going to do anything with the owner
or the house.
She was Penelope Spheres.
Yes, and Brooks Lack remodel.
And she made an overnight fortune with a successful movie. She was a totally nice person. So then we walked around the house, and the house was really a remodel. I mean, it was to be complete. We wanted to see the house, but she was totally nice, and then she showed us the garden and the pool and everything. So we said, okay, you must have a lot of friends, with such a nice place. And she says, oh no, she says, I lost all my friends, because I became a millionaire overnight. So all my friends were jealous, and we never spoke to each other again. So, but she was followed by this very enormous guy looking at us like, one wrong movement and you will be dead. So,
That might be why she has no friends.
Yeah, could be.
Maybe the guy. That's it.
That big guy back there.
Yeah.
Possible. Yeah.
You've seen a lot of houses that have been renovated, some by Lautner, often by somebody else. I want to ask, who's done the most hideous renovation to a Lautner house?
Uh-oh.
Now, hideous, it's difficult to say because then usually the name is not there.
The roof cabin in Banning, that was absolutely, that was the top. I mean, there's a lady who lived in this house, this beautiful cabin on the top of a hill. Actually, everything which Lautner, it was already a remodel by Lautner, but everything Lautner designed, she just took out. And she said, well, I just wanted to change this. And I just thought, well, what would Lautner have done? And I thought, well, I should do this in a bit more Lautner way. And by doing this, she took out everything Lautner designed and made it completely her own palace, which is very funny, but also very sad. So,
and then there's another case of a famous wife of a very famous rock star in the United States who bought a house.
By any chance, did he wear blue suede shoes?
No, I can't say that.
Okay.
But we don't want to give away any. But she turned the house quite into something different. She added one floor. She took away the floor-to-ceiling glass. She made it into a Mediterranean palazzo.
She didn't like the style, so she changed the style of the house. But as a matter of fact, all the layout of the house, she kept the same. So all the rooms were in the same position because she liked the view, she liked the way the sun would come up in the morning and would go down the other side. So she kept the layout, but she changed the looks because she didn't like the looks.
And it took us years to get into that house because of the fame of the owner. And she was totally nice. We also understand the guy with the blue suede shoes, that he fell for this beautiful lady. But you also asked who did a great job. The two people who have to be mentioned in that sense are Frank Escher and his business partner Ravi Gunawarda. They did a fantastic job on the Chemosphere. The Chemosphere was in total ruins. And they really sort of made it a pristine condition, almost entirely original, with Swiss precision. So that's great that you actually have architects who are able to do such a thing. And of course, the Garcia house was beautifully renovated, and quite some houses are beautiful, being brought beautiful up to date. Tyler House is also beautifully.
Although changed quite a bit, but still very nicely done. And there's the Harpel House, which is also
Harpel,
fantastic, the way it's been.
Is that the one in L.A. or the one in Alaska?
The one in Alaska is still original, and the one in LA was a mess before, but after Mark Hadawi bought it and started to renovate it, he did such a great job and brought everything back to the original. Just amazing.
Now, during your project, something really cool happened. A house appeared out of nowhere that people thought was never built, and it was purchased by Trina Turk and her husband Jonathan Scow.
Yeah.
Tell us about that house.
The Salkin House, yeah. We were really close, like really a stone's throw away. There's another project by Lautner, one of the early works, and we knew, of course, the model photograph, but we never suspected it actually to be built almost one-to-one on what you can see on the model. So it was really a true discovery, also beautifully restored. We didn't manage to get in somehow. We couldn't get our agendas synchronized. But it's a cute little house. It's not one of the great Lautner houses, but it's definitely a Lautner house, and it's in beautiful condition now. Yeah.
Now, Tycho, there's at least one house you never got inside, one of Lautner's largest and most elaborate. So tell us about the concrete castle in Malibu.
Yeah, that house is literally another world. That house is, I think it's Lautner's final masterpiece. Of course, he had this large house in Acapulco 1 or 2 decades before. But this house in Malibu, also the client, he asked for a completely different world, just my own castle, my own palace, my own private escape. That house, there are no straight walls in it. So every wall is in concrete, and it's three-dimensional curves. Lautner always said that it took him 40 years to get this kind of precision in the curve making, in the designing of these curves. We haven't seen it from the inside. We've seen it on the outside. We've tried everything to see it, but of course we know the pictures, and we spoke to anybody who knows about this house and who was involved. But the way it has been built, that's also a whole different story. I mean, now with computers, you can do curves and you can make precise drawings of it, and it's possible to construct. But at that time, we're talking as the commission started in 1980, 1980 to 1990, so it's a 10-year work.
A 10-year build. Wow.
10-year build.
And it's enormous. It's a huge house.
It's absolutely enormous. It has a 9-car garage. That's maybe says enough about the size.
Is the 9-car garage got curved walls and floors?
Yes. Also, everything. Everything is there. There's nothing straight in that house. But they built this huge model, and then to make these drawings, they had to photograph this model.
They cut it in half.
Cut it in half. Otherwise, you couldn't transport it, and you couldn't.
For the section also. Yeah.
For the section, but so they made projections of this model. They photographed the model, made projections, and they would trace the projections just to make these drawings. Otherwise, it was impossible to get proper working drawings out of this.
You guys tried some crazy things to get the attention of the owner. I read that some of them involved leaving messages in the sand. How did that work?
Well, basically, we tried before, there was a group of students, we tried before to write letters, but we didn't get any answers. We went to the beach side. Actually, as a matter of fact, we saw the owner sitting on his balcony smoking a cigar. And so we tried to, in the sand, we wrote our phone number, call this number, please. But I think he was only sardonically smiling.
Later on, we heard a rumor that there was some problems with a little window of the swimming pool, and then we were having dinner with one of the collaborators of Lautner, who was still doing remodeling on the works, and he took the phone. He says, let me phone the builder. Maybe you can join him to help him to install the glass in the pool. And the builder said, yes, okay, they can come, no problem, except that the glass did not arrive yet. So if they have some patience for a few weeks, they can join me to install the glass. But unfortunately, we were back in the Netherlands by that time, of course. So it didn't work out. It's still waiting for us, that house. It was actually a house also, that's also good to mention, Helena A-Z. She was Lautner's muse, maybe, or his right hand.
We've had her on the show.
We've had her on the show.
Yeah. I mean, Helena, of course, was the one who worked on all the great masterpieces and is doing now actually remodeling of some of the houses. Very, very nice and very successful. So it's great that these houses are in the hands of the right people.
Right. Especially your cigar smoking buddy.
Well, yeah.
They're on the beach. Are there any other Lautner houses you've tried to get into but you couldn't?
Yes, there are.
There's a few. There's like the
Siegel house.
Siegel, yeah, it was difficult.
Very tough that we haven't seen that one, because there's one of the most beautiful houses which he designed. But it was first owned by Courtney Cox, which was impossible. She didn't let anybody in because of her fame. And afterwards, Jamie McCord, but she's also turned out to be a very difficult person to convince. And now she has remodeled the house, and I'm not sure if it's been done in very well. It's been done properly, but she changed some major things, like moving the pool, and I'm not so sure if that's so nice. And she tore down the Lautner Design Studio Edition.
Moving a pool has got to be
expensive.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I think money is not an issue.
Yeah.
It's not the issue.
It goes without saying, I guess.
So there's a few categories of people that were difficult to let us show the house. Like, one is also that the children of the original clients, then they still live in the house and they don't have money to keep it up to date, the house. And they're just embarrassed, they don't want to show the house. So there's a handful of those houses. The Zimmermann house, for instance, we never got into.
The Mauer house. Yeah.
Mauer house. The Zimmermann was actually an interesting story, because we did manage to phone the neighbors, and they said, "Well, we actually have a tree house, and from our tree house you can look straight into their house.
Leave no stone unturned."
Really, you are fanboys, aren't you?
He says, "Why don't you pop over?" And well, she was right. So we could see the house, but then from the outside, but it's really, really close.
Yeah.
Now, guys, are there rumors of any remaining Lautners, something undiscovered?
There might be. We're not sure, but there might be. Every time we go in the archive, we find drawings of projects which nobody seems to know about, which have never been published, at least. We are always looking for addresses on the drawings, and then we Google them directly. And sometimes we found stuff in the archives which was not known at all.
How many Lautner houses do you know of that exist?
Still exists, you mean?
Yeah,
still standing.
That you know of.
Like 104 or something.
Yeah, a little over 100. They're the ones, and they're all in our book, because we did not discover any of them after we wrote it. But it doesn't mean that there aren't more. For example, in the back, in the archive section of the book, we have this hotel project. Actually, something has been built at that site which looks a little bit familiar to the Lautner design we found in the archive. So we haven't managed to check that one out. It's on Sigolvida Boulevard,
the Islander
Motel,
1958.
So that's something which we should check out in more detail. But if we go into the archive, I'm sure we will find maybe a handful more houses or remodels, which definitely there are remodels which nobody knows about.
It's always the case that sometimes the process went wrong, and then you don't know exactly how far Lautner was involved in the execution of something, so he didn't want to acknowledge it anymore as his own work. Although when you compare the drawings with something that you find which is built, definitely recognizable elements elements. But the question, it's almost like in art, in paintings, when is a Rembrandt painting still a Rembrandt? If one of his pupils finished it. Or,
that's right, yeah.
So there's a few of these cases that are a bit unclear.
Yeah, there's also some discussion about it at the moment. If we have a new complete projects list, some people think that you should stick to the list that Lautner himself compiled, because the other projects which are not on that list, he had a reason for it to not appear on this list. But we think if it's clear that you can see the hand of the master, we should list them.
Gentlemen, are you doing any book tours in America?
We should. Please invite us. We come.
Get your publisher to schedule some sessions for you.
Yeah, we'd definitely come. It would be great. Actually, I'm flying to the US this summer, but in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the woods. So I don't know if they have bookstores there.
No bookstores. Oh.
So yeah, we would love to, but we need some kind of invite, I guess, to get it organized.
Okay, architects, universities, design centers, libraries, you can invite these two gentlemen to come and tell you their crazy fun adventure chasing Lautner projects all around the U.S. Tycho and Jan Richard, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a blast.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, it's a nice conversation. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special real estate agent for Modernist houses. 919-995-0550. Okay, take us out, Tom.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive Modernist archives to hear past shows, discover 7,000 mid-century houses, and access 2.6 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Our wonderful guests get thoroughly Googled by Chief Researcher Cindy Stratton, not her real name. She's modernism's own Greta Garbo and has her own treehouse. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Geil. George and I'll be back soon with another well-researched, passion-funded, incredibly detailed, almost insane episode of U.S. Modernist Radio.